Hey, my name's Nate. I'm 23, living in a quiet little suburb just outside Chicago. I moved here a couple months ago for an internship as a junior engineer at a small tech firm downtown. It's not the kind of job that makes you rich, but it pays the bills and keeps me busy. My apartment's nothing special, a one-bedroom with creaky floors, a fridge that hums too loud, and a view of a parking lot. I live alone, no roommates, no pets. Just me and a stack of takeout menus I keep meaning to organize. Life's simple, maybe too simple, but it's mine. I've never been the guy who stands out. In college, I was the one in the back row earbuds and finishing assignments early, just to avoid small talk. I dated a couple times, nothing serious. Girls my age always seemed to want something I couldn't figure out, attention, excitement, a 5-year plan. I don't know. I'm still working on my own plan one day at a time. Moving here was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to focus, but sometimes it feels like I'm just drifting through someone else's routine. The neighborhood's quiet, the kind of place where people mow their lawns on Saturdays and kids ride bikes until the streetlights flicker on. I don't know many folks here yet. I nod at the guy who jogs every morning, wave at the old couple across the street, but that's about it. Except for Clara. She lives right next door in a tidy one-story house with white shutters and a small garden. She tends to early in the mornings. Clara's 38. I think, though, nobody says her age out loud. She's the kind of person you notice without meaning to. Not loud or flashy, just present. Like she carries a kind of calm that makes you want to stand a little closer. I first met her a few weeks after moving in. I was dragging my trash can to the curb and she walked over with a tin of warm blueberry muffins still steaming from the oven. "Welcome to the block," she said, her voice soft but steady, like she meant every word. I mumbled a thank you, probably came off awkward, but she just smiled and walked back to her place. Since then, every Sunday morning she leaves a small box of baked goods on my doorstep, muffins, cookies, sometimes banana bread. I don't know why she does it. I don't ask. I just eat them and leave the empty tin on her porch with a note that says, "Thanks." Clara's a bit of a mystery around here. Folks call her the Winter Lady because she keeps to herself, rarely shows up at neighborhood barbecues or block parties. I heard she's divorced, has been for years, but nobody talks about it much. She works from home. Something about editing books in her house always smells faintly of jasmine tea. I've seen her through her window sometimes early in the morning, sitting with a mug and a book, her silhouette soft against the dawn light. I don't stare, but I notice. That night, everything changed. It was a Thursday, late, maybe 9 or 10. A storm had rolled in, the kind that makes the air feel heavy before it breaks. I was halfway through microwaving dinner when the power cut out. The apartment went dark, my phone barely holding a charge. I fumbled around looking for a flashlight, but all I had was a half-dead headlamp from a camping trip I barely remembered. I needed something better. Clara's porch light was still on. Somehow her place hadn't lost power, so I grabbed my jacket and stepped out into the drizzle. The rain was picking up cold and sharp against my face as I knocked on her door. It creaked open, and there she was, standing in a long gray robe, her dark hair loose and a little messy, like she'd been reading or maybe dozing off. The faint scent of jasmine tea drifted out from her kitchen, mixing with the damp air. She tilted her head, not surprised, just curious. "Power out at your place?" she asked, her voice low, almost soothing. I nodded, feeling a little dumb. "Yeah. You got a flashlight I could borrow?" She stepped aside, gesturing me in. "Come in. It's a mess out there." I hesitated, but the rain was turning into a downpour, so I stepped inside. Her living room was warm, lit by a single lamp, a soft jazz record spinning quietly on a turntable. She closed the door behind me, then turned, her eyes catching mine for a moment longer than usual. "You should stay tonight," she said, calm, like it was the most natural thing. No sense going back out in this. My heart skipped, just for a second. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, standing there in her doorway, wondering what I'd just walked into. The rain didn't let up. It hammered against Clara's windows, a steady rhythm that drowned out the soft jazz still playing in her living room. I stood just inside her doorway, jacket dripping onto the hardwood floor, feeling out of place in her warm, tidy space. Clara handed me a towel, her fingers brushing mine for half a second. "Dry off," she said, her voice calm, but with a hint of something I couldn't quite name. "You're not going back out in that storm." I nodded, wiping my face and hands, trying to shake the awkwardness. Her house felt like a world apart from mine. No creaky floors, no buzzing fridge, just quiet order. A bookshelf lined one wall stacked with novels and journals, some with worn spines like they'd been read 100 times. A single candle flickered on the coffee table, casting shadows that danced with the music. I didn't know what to do with myself, so I just stood there, clutching the towel like it was a lifeline. Sit, Clara said, pointing to the couch. She disappeared into the kitchen and came back with 2 mugs of jasmine tea, the steam curling up in the dim light. She sat across from me, legs tucked under her, still in that gray robe that hung loosely, but somehow made her look more put together than I ever could. You don't talk much, do you? She said, not accusing, just curious. I shrugged, managing a half smile. Not much to say. My life's not exactly thrilling. She tilted her head, studying me. I don't know. You seem like you've got stories. You just don't tell them. I laughed under my breath, not sure if she was teasing or serious. What about you? Nobody around here knows much about you. They call you the Winter Lady. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. Do they? Well, I suppose I don't make it easy. I like my quiet. She took a sip of her tea, her eyes drifting to the window where the rain streaked down. I wasn't always like this. Used to be married. Thought it was forever. Turns out forever's just a word when someone stops listening. I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded, letting her words settle. The storm outside roared louder, and a flash of lightning lit up the room for a split second. Power's still out at my place, I said, checking my phone. Guess I'm stuck here for a bit. Clara set her mug down. You're not stuck. You're welcome. She paused, then added, sofa's not great for sleeping, though. It's lumpy. If it gets late, you can take the bed. It's big enough. My throat tightened. I'm fine on the couch, I said quickly, maybe too quickly. She didn't push, just nodded and changed the subject, asking about my job, what brought me to Chicago. We talked for hours, the storm, a constant hum in the background. She told me about editing books, how she loved getting lost in someone else's words. I told her about my internship, how I was good with machines, but still figuring out people. It was easy talking to her, easier than it should have been. The clock ticked past midnight and the rain still hadn't stopped. I was ready to crash on the couch, but Clara stood up, stretching. Come on, she said, heading toward her bedroom. You'll freeze out here, bed's warmer. I hesitated, my heart thumping louder than the thunder outside. You sure? I asked, my voice quieter than I meant. She turned her eyes steady. I wouldn't offer if I wasn't. There was no flirtation in her tone, just a kind of quiet certainty, like she was offering shelter from more than just the storm. I followed her, feeling like I was crossing some invisible line. Her bedroom was simple white linens, a small lamp, a stack of books on the nightstand. She tossed me a blanket and pointed to the far side of the bed. You stay on your side, I'll stay on mine, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I nodded, lying down, fully clothed my back to her. The mattress dipped as she settled in, and we lay there, inches apart, the sound of rain filling the silence. My heart wouldn't slow down. I was sure she could hear it, but she didn't say anything. Neither did I. Morning came gray and damp, the power was back, and I woke to the smell of coffee. Clara was already up in the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened. You sleep okay? She asked, handing me a mug. Yeah, I lied, still feeling the weight of last night. I helped her check a flickering light in her hallway, tightening a loose bulb before I left. Thanks for letting me crash, I said at the door. Anytime she replied, her eyes lingering on mine, just a second too long. That wasn't the end of it. A few days later, she knocked on my door holding a pot of soup. Made too much, she said, but her smile said it wasn't an accident. I invited her in and we ate at my tiny kitchen table, talking about nothing and everything music books, the way the neighborhood felt alive at dusk. I started finding excuses to stop by her place, fixing a squeaky door hinge, helping her move a bookshelf, setting up her ancient printer. She taught me how to brew tea properly, laughing when I burned my tongue on the first sip. You're young, but you listen, she said one evening, her voice soft. That's rare. One night as we sat on her porch with mugs of tea, the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet grass, I asked her something I'd been holding back. Do you ever get lonely living like this, I mean? By yourself. She looked out at the street, her fingers tightening around her mug. Nobody chooses lonely Nate, she said. You just choose peace. Sometimes they look the same. Her words hit me harder than I expected, like she'd seen right through me. I didn't say anything, just sat there letting the quiet stretch between us. But it wasn't empty. It felt full, like something was growing in the spaces we didn't fill with words. The days after that first night at Clara's blurred into a rhythm I hadn't expected. I'd come home from the office, my head full of code and deadlines, and find myself glancing at her house, wondering if her porch light would be on. It usually was. We didn't plan it, but we kept finding reasons to see each other. She'd text me about a leftover casserole she didn't want to waste, or I'd offer to fix something in her house, a loose curtain rod, a sticky window. It was like we were building a bridge, one small moment at a time, and I didn't even realize how far we'd crossed until it was too late to turn back. Clara's place became a kind of refuge. My apartment was functional, but hers felt alive. The jazz records she played, the faint scent of jasmine tea, the way her bookshelves seemed to hold a piece of her in every worn page, it all pulled me in. We'd sit in her living room talking about nothing important, the best pizza spot in Chicago, why she hated horror movies, how I once tried to build a birdhouse and ended up with splinters for days. She laughed at that, her eyes crinkling in a way that made her look younger, softer. "You're too earnest, Nate," she said once, shaking her head. "It's going to get you in trouble." "Maybe it already has," I said, half joking, but her smile faded just enough to make me wonder if she'd heard something I hadn't meant to say. One evening, about a month after the storm, I was over at her place helping string fairy lights along her front porch. She wanted them up for the fall, said they made the house feel less lonely at night. The air was crisp, the kind that smells like leaves in coming winter. I was balanced on a stepladder, fumbling with a tangle of wires while Clara held the other end, directing me like I was assembling a spaceship. Higher on that side, she called, her voice teasing. "You're making it look like a drunk put them up," I grinned, adjusting the strand. "You're the boss, but don't blame me when this looks like a Christmas tree explosion." She laughed, and the sound warmed me more than it should have. I stepped down from the ladder, but my foot caught the edge of a rung, and I stumbled forward right into her. My hands landed on her shoulders to steady myself, and she caught my arms, her grip firm but gentle. For a moment we were frozen like that, her face inches from mine, her breath warm against my cheek. Her hands didn't let go. Neither did mine. "You okay?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "Yeah," I said, my throat dry. "Just clumsy." She didn't move, didn't pull back. Her eyes, dark and steady, held mine like they were searching for something. "You know," she said so soft I almost missed it. "You make people feel safe, Nate. Not everyone can do that." My heart was pounding loud enough I was sure she could hear it. I wanted to say something clever, something to break the tension, but all I managed was, "I'm just me." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, more like an acknowledgement. "That's enough." We stood there, the porch lights glowing faintly above us, the night air cool against my skin. Then slowly, like she was giving me time to pull away, she leaned in. Her lips brushed mine light as a breath, barely a kiss, but enough to stop the world. I didn't hesitate. I kissed her back soft, careful, like we were both afraid of breaking something fragile. Her hands slid to my waist and mine found the curve of her neck, her skin warm under my fingers. It wasn't desperate or wild, just real, like we'd both been waiting for this without knowing it. When we pulled back, her eyes were brighter, like she'd let go of something heavy. "I didn't plan that," she said, her voice low, almost embarrassed. "Me neither," I said, and we both laughed, the sound shaky but honest. That night, we ended up back in her bedroom, not like the first time with the storm and the careful distance. We lay close, her head on my chest, my arm around her. No rush, no expectations, just the quiet of being together. She told me about her marriage, how it started with love but ended in silence, her ex-husband, too caught up in his own world to see her. "I got used to being invisible," she said, her fingers tracing idle patterns on my shirt. "Until you..." I didn't know what to say, so I just held her tighter. "You're not invisible to me," I said finally, and I meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments. We were careful, nobody in the neighborhood needed to know. I'd slip over to her place after dark, or she'd come to mine bringing tea or a book she thought I'd like. We'd cook together, her teasing me for burning the rice, me laughing when she spilled flour on her shirt. Every touch, Every glance felt like a secret we were guarding, not because it was wrong, but because it was ours. Once as we sat on her couch, her hand resting on mine, she looked at me and said, "You're young, Nate. You sure about this?" I didn't hesitate. I've never been sure of anything. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of what we were doing. She was 38, a woman who'd built a life, survived a marriage, carried scars I could only guess at. I was 23, still figuring out who I was, living in a rented apartment with no real roots. The gap between us wasn't just years, it was experience, history, things I couldn't fully understand. Yet when I looked at her, none of that mattered. She made me feel like I was more than just a kid with a job and a dream. She made me feel like I was home. The morning after that kiss, I woke up in Clara's bed, her head still resting on my chest, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air. The room was quiet, the early light filtering through her curtains, painting soft stripes across the floor. I expected her to be the same as last night, warm, open, maybe even teasing me about my terrible cooking. But something was different. She stirred, sat up, and looked at me with eyes that weren't quite hers. They were guarded, like a door had closed overnight. "Morning," she said, her voice flat, not cold but not warm either. "Coffee's in the kitchen if you want it." I nodded, unsure what to say. "You okay?" I asked, sitting up, my shirt wrinkled from sleeping in it. She gave a small smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just got a lot to do today." She stood, pulling her robe tighter around her, and walked out of the room. I sat there for a moment, the weight of her words settling like damp air. Something had shifted, and I didn't know why. I followed her to the kitchen where she was already pouring coffee, her movements quick, almost mechanical. The jazz record we'd played last night sat silent on the turntable. No tea, no lingering glances, no invitation to stay for breakfast. "I've got some work to catch up on," she said, not looking at me. "You should probably head back. I'll be fine." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words stuck. "Sure," I said, finally grabbing my jacket. "Thanks for last night." She nodded, her eyes fixed on her mug, and I left, the door clicking shut behind me. The walk back to my apartment felt longer than the 10 steps it took to cross our lawns. The neighborhood was quiet, the morning gray and heavy, like it was holding its breath. For the next 3 days, Clara was a ghost. No texts, no knocks on my door, no boxes of muffins left on my porch. I'd see her porch light flicker on at night, hear the faint hum of her jazz records through her window, but her curtains stayed drawn. I wanted to knock, to ask what was wrong, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at me that morning, like she was pulling back from something she regretted. Maybe it was my own fear that I'd crossed a line I didn't fully understand. I kept replaying that night, the kiss. The way her hand felt in mine, the way she'd said I made her feel seen. Had I misread it? Was it just a moment for her? Something fleeting that I'd turned into more in my head? At 23, I was used to feeling out of my depth, but this was different. Clara wasn't just a neighbor or a friend. She was someone who'd made me feel like I was more than a kid with a job and a half-empty apartment. But now I wondered if I'd been wrong about all of it. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat in my living room, staring at my phone, drafting texts I never sent. "Hey, you okay? Did I do something wrong?" They all felt too desperate, too young. I thought about what she'd said that night on her porch about choosing peace over loneliness. Maybe peace for her meant keeping people at a distance. Maybe I'd gotten too close too fast. I walked past her house that evening, slowing down as I passed her driveway. Her car was there, but the windows were dark, no music, no signs of her. I felt a pang in my chest, not anger, just confusion. I'd never felt this way before, like I'd lost something I hadn't even known I had. At work, I threw myself into coding, trying to drown out the questions. Was it the age gap? 15 years wasn't nothing. She'd lived a whole life, marriage, divorce, years of building herself back up. I was still figuring out how to pay my rent on time. Maybe she saw that and realized this couldn't work. On the 5th day, I couldn't stand the silence. I grabbed a scrap of paper from my desk, scrawled a note in my messy handwriting. "Clara, if you need me, I'm right next door. No pressure, just knock." I folded it, slipped it under her door, and walked away before I could second-guess myself. It wasn't much, but it was honest. I didn't know what she was thinking, but I wanted her to know I wasn't running. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The hum of my fridge, the only sound in the apartment. I thought about her marriage, what little she'd told me, how her ex-husband had stopped seeing her, how she'd learned to live with silence. I wondered if she was scared of repeating that, of letting someone in only to be left again. Or maybe she was scared of what people would think, a 38-year-old woman with a 23-year-old kid from next door. I didn't have answers, but I knew I didn't want to be another person who walked away. I closed my eyes trying to sleep, but her face kept coming back, the way she'd looked at me under the porch lights. The warmth of her hand, the softness of her kiss. I didn't know what we were or what we could be, but I knew it wasn't nothing. It was real, even if it scared her. Even if it scared me. The days after I left that note stretched longer than they should have. I kept busy work errands, fixing a leaky faucet in my bathroom, but my mind was always next door. Clara's porch light stayed on every night, but her windows were dark, her jazz records silent. I didn't push. I'd said my piece, left it on her doorstep. If she wanted space, I'd give it to her, even if it felt like holding my breath. It was a Tuesday evening, a week after the note, when I heard it, a soft knock so faint, I thought I'd imagined it. I was sprawled on my couch, half watching a documentary about old bridges, my dinner, a cold slice of pizza from the night before. The knock came again, deliberate but gentle. I stood heart-thudding and opened the door. Clara stood there in the same gray robe from that first stormy night, her hair loose, a little damp from the evening chill. In her hands were 2 mugs of jasmine tea steam curling up into the cool air. Her eyes met mine, not guarded like before, but soft, like she'd been carrying something heavy and was ready to set it down. "I got your note," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, knotting my throat too tight for words. She walked in, setting the mugs on my cluttered coffee table, and sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap. I sat across from her, leaving space, waiting. The silence wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light either. It was full of things we hadn't said yet. I didn't know what to say. She started looking at the mugs instead of me. After that night, I got scared. Not of you. Of me. She paused, her fingers tightening around each other. "I've been alone a long time, Nate. After my marriage, I built walls. They kept me safe, but they also kept me empty. Then you came along, and I didn't know how to let someone in without losing myself again." I leaned forward, my hands on my knees. "I didn't want to push you," I said. I missed you. The tea, the music, the way you make everything feel like it matters." She looked up, then her eyes catching the dim light. "I missed you too," she said, almost a whisper. "I kept hearing your footsteps in my kitchen, even when you weren't there. I'd wake up and expect to see you fixing my shelves or burning my tea." She smiled, small but real. That's when I knew I couldn't keep running. I didn't know what to say, so I just reached out my hand, finding hers. Her fingers were warm from the mug, and she didn't pull away. We sat like that, the documentary droning on in the background, the world outside fading into the night. "I'm not good at this," she said after a moment. "I'm 38. I've got scars, Nate. Things you shouldn't have to carry. You don't have to carry them alone." I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm not a kid, Clara. I know what I feel. I know what this is." She studied me like she was searching for a lie and finding none. "What is this?" she asked, not challenging, just curious. I took a breath, the words coming easier than I expected. "It's us. It's real. It's not perfect, and it doesn't have to be. I don't care about the years between us or what anyone else thinks. I just know I'm better when I'm with you." Her eyes softened, and she squeezed my hand just enough to feel it. "You make it sound so simple," she said, a hint of a laugh in her voice. "It is," I said. "At least it can be." We didn't say much after that. She slid closer, her shoulder against mine, and we sipped the tea, letting the quiet settle around us. It wasn't a promise or a declaration, just a moment shared and whole. The neighborhood slept outside, unaware of the bridge we'd rebuilt in my living room. We didn't talk about the future, about labels, or what came next. We didn't need to. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not just in her house or mine, but in the space we'd carved out together. As she stood to leave, she paused at the door, turning to look at me. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for not giving up." I smiled, my chest warm. "I'm right next door. Always will be." She nodded, her lips curving into a smile that felt like home. Then she stepped out into the night, her robe catching the glow of my porch light. I closed the door, but the warmth stayed. I wasn't just the kid from next door anymore. I was someone who'd found something real, something worth holding on to. Love wasn't loud or flashy, not for us. It was quiet, steady, like the sound of rain or the weight of a mug in your hands. And for now, that was enough.